So welcome again to Because God Loves Stories, our annual storytelling concert in memory of our dear friend, Alec Gelser. I want to say I'm very excited by this year's program because we have always exceptionally interesting Dan Yashinsky as this year's featured teller. But before I formally introduce Dan, I would like to tell you a few stories, and before that, I would like to thank a few people. So first of all, I'd like to thank Jim and Alon, Alec's sons, for your dedication to preserving Alec's memory and message. I also want to thank Brian and Dan for coming year in and year out to make this experience happen. And of course, the Storytelling Festival for providing the space and the venue for this memorial program to take place. So big hand to the Storytelling. So there's a Spanish proverb that says that many people, perhaps most people, die twice. They die when they physically leave this world, but they die again unnecessarily when people forget about them. The first death is inevitable, but the second is not. It often happens anyways. So I want to thank you all here for making sure that Alec's legacy continues to be remembered and celebrated, and that his stories continue to be told. And speaking of stories, I would like to share a few stories with you. And since we're coming up to the Jewish holiday of Passover very, very soon, I would like to share with you a few Passover-related stories. So my first story comes from Israel Salanter. Israel Salanter lived in Europe at the end of the 19th century. He was a very profound thinker. He once said that it's easier to learn the entire Torah and the entire Talmud, the entire Bible off by heart, than it is to change a single habit. I'm not sure if he was a smoker, but he probably knew a few of them, right? But because learning something off by heart is just like a computer, but changing a habit, that's changing your soul. So he was a very profound, psychologically evolved person. And he always saw the bigger picture of what was being asked of human beings. And one day before Passover, he was asked to come give kosher certification to a matzah factory, a factory that produced unleavened bread for Jewish people before Passover. And he comes to the factory and inspects it, and the inspection is over, and the owner comes over and says, "So can I have the certification?" Rabbi Salanter says, "No, unfortunately I cannot give it to you." "But why? What's wrong?" "Well, I found blood in your matzot, in your matzahs. I found blood in your unleavened bread." The factory owner is shocked. "What are you talking about? This factory is completely clean of any animal product." What do you mean?" Rabbi Salanter said to him, "You don't understand. It's the blood of your workers. I saw the way you treated them. The factory is poorly ventilated. You abuse them. You don't pay them on time. It's their blood that is in your product, what makes it just as not legitimate had you put non-kosher ingredients in it." So it's an amazing story about not just looking at the technical aspects of something, but looking at the larger picture. You know, in a lighter vein, I heard a story about a man who had stopped at the border, and they were going through his belongings, and they found they had 5 dentures. And so the customs official says, "Well, what do you have 5 dentures?" "Well, I have 5 dentures. I'm a very, very religious Jew, and you know, I have to switch the dentures in between meat dishes and milk dishes." So the customs officer is like, "Yeah, but that's 5, not 2. He says, "Well, okay, but I'm extremely religious, which means on Passover we eat meat and milk as well. So I have meat and milk during the regular year, and then meat and milk in Passover." So the customs, "Okay, we're up to 4. Why do you have 5 dentures?" And the man gets a little embarrassed. "You promise you won't tell anybody?" "Okay, I promise. Why do you have 5? "Well, every once in a while, I like to have a ham and cheese sandwich." Which reminds me, a few months ago, I started my first foray into yoga, a little late, I guess, and I met my teacher for the very first time about 2 months ago. And I have a rabbi staying with me, and I also have the synagogue where I conduct services, so I think she was probably a bit intimidated coming to my house, and I was a little late, so my rabbi friend met her. And we start the session, and I say to her, "Listen, my dog is out with a dog walker. When he comes back into the house, he tears around the house, he licks everybody." I mean, she says, "Excuse me, please concentrate on your breathing. In and out." I said, "Just concentrate on your breathing." Of course, my dog, Mickey, charges home halfway through the session. I said, don't interrupt. We're in the middle of breathing. So I hear my dog doing something. I don't know what it is. He's ripping something apart, but I'm supposed to be concentrating on my breathing. Anyways, the session is over. She goes off to the bathroom, and then she comes back like a few minutes later, and her face is white like a ghost. And I said, Jeanette, what's wrong? She says, I'm so sorry. I feel so badly. I knew I never should have done this. Done what? What happened? Just your dog during the yoga session. I said, yeah, what did he do? He somehow ripped open my purse, and he got into, and he ate my sandwich. And I'm so sorry. I said, you're sorry? I should be sorry for my dogs. No, you don't understand. You know what he ate? He ate my ham and cheese sandwich. And when I'm home with rabbis, I knew. I said, listen, you have to just, don't worry about it. So what do you mean? He says, my dog, he might be Jewish, but he's not ultra-Orthodox. He doesn't keep kosher. I said, well, he also eats kosher, but he eats anything. So you're forgiven. But she had a look on her face that she'd just broken every commandment in the universe. So now I want to share with you a Passover story that Alec shared with me for the first time. And the story is about Elijah the prophet. So if you don't have a huge background in Judaism, a little introduction about Elijah the prophet. I hope I'm not going to offend anybody, but he's kind of like the Jewish version of Santa Claus, okay? Santa Claus comes on Christmas, or around that time it comes down the chute. Elijah the prophet usually comes through the door at some point during the Passover Seder, and he's supposed to, anybody know, what does he do? He sips a little bit of the wine. In fact, there's a very famous psychologist, Solomon Asch, who was the first person to come up with this whole theory of peer pressure. In other words, he would do an experiment where he'd have 3 lines on a blackboard. 2 lines are obviously the same length, and the third line was a completely different length. And he would do an experiment, and obviously people would say, yeah, these lines are the same length, that third line is a different length. But when he invoked peer pressure, and everybody's saying the wrong answers, and somebody would walk into the room, many of the students would change their opinions because all these people around them were saying something which is obviously untrue, but they couldn't resist the masses. And how did he figure that out? Because when he was a child in Poland at the Passover Seder, everybody kept telling him that Elijah had come in and sipped from the cup. Can't you see the cup's gone in a little bit? And he believed it, and later on he wondered why, and then he realized it was a peer pressure from all his uncles and aunts getting him to believe it. So that's a little bit about Elijah the prophet. So who was Elijah the prophet in Judaism? According to the Bible, he did not die. He went up to heaven in a chariot. And ever since then, he goes around the world doing acts of kindness and compassion and love. That's what Elijah does. He goes from village to village, from town to town, and he does deeds of loving kindness. He never died. He's this mysterious person who doesn't identify himself, but that is what he does. And my English name is Eli or Eli. In Hebrew, it's Eliyahu or Elijah. And Alec's Hebrew name was Eliyahu or Elijah. So it's a nice connection. And Passover is a time when people open the door, they have the cup of Elijah at the center of the table, and there's a feeling that his presence might be felt, and this is a story about looking for Elijah. So there was a little boy by the name of Eli. He lived in a small town. His father passed away when he was a very young child, and so his mother had to make do to support him. But luckily they lived in a loving community that took care of him and his mother, and made sure that he had all the education and all the physical needs were taken care of. When he was a young boy, Eli asked his mother, where did my name come from? And his mother said, your name comes from your grandfather who passed away. You're named after him. Well, where did his name, Elijah, come from? They said, well, he came from his grandfather. His name was also Elijah. Yeah, but where did his name come from? He says, oh, well, kind of reminds you of the famous First Nation story where the question is, the little boy asked the elder, what is the world resting on? And the elder says it's resting on the back of a giant turtle. Well, what's that resting on? The back of another giant turtle? Well, it's turtles all the way down. Enough questions, right? It's Elijah all the way back. Said, but who was the first Elijah? And the mother says, oh, I'll explain to you. The first Elijah was a man in the Bible who was so righteous, who spoke truth to power, that he never died. He goes around the world doing acts of loving kindness and compassion. And that's who you're ultimately named after. Well, can I meet him? You might be able to. If you're lucky enough, you might see him on the street. You might bump into him. You might be in the neighboring village. You might be in our village. Maybe if you look for him hard enough, you might find him. His entire childhood, Eli looked for Elijah, but didn't find him. He grew older. He became very successful in his own right. And because he was taken care of so well when he was a young child by the community, he did the same thing for the community. He went ahead and took care of other people in need. And then one day, he approaches the rabbi and says, Rabbi, I've never denied any request that you had of me. I have a request of you. The rabbi says, what is it? I would like to meet Elijah. Elijah who? Elijah the prophet. You know, he never died. The rabbi says, well, it's not exactly the easiest request in the world. And now Eli becomes angry. Rabbi, I have done every single thing you've asked me to do and never once refused. And the first time I ask you something, you say no. I will never help you again. And the rabbi looks at Eli and says, is that why you help? Because you expect something in return? Is that why the community helped you when you were younger? Because they expect something back? Should you not help people because they need the help? Shame on you. And Eli hung his head in shame. He said, Rabbi, you're right. I made a mistake. But I was so anxious to meet Elijah the prophet that I overstepped my boundaries. But is it still not possible? Of course I'll still help the community. The rabbi said, since I see your request is so sincere, I will tell you how you're going to meet Elijah the prophet. Really? Yes. This coming Passover, the first night, I want you to go to a nearby village and find the poorest people in that village, the poorest family. I want you to celebrate your first night Passover Seder with them, with that family, and I guarantee you, you will see Elijah the prophet. So Eli does this. He goes to the small town. Who is the poorest family? Moshe the water carrier and his wife Sarah. He finds their home. He knocks on the door. Moshe answers the door. Yes, I would like to celebrate Passover with you. Listen, we always accept yes, but we have 8 children. We have barely enough, but please, you're welcome to stay. Eli says, no problem. And the next day, wagon loads and chariots and carriages of the finest foods and the finest silverware and cutlery and napkins and tablecloths. Everything shows up. Moshe and his wife cannot believe their good luck. And the Passover Seder begins, and they're having a wonderful time, and the food and the conversation, everything is flowing. The only person who's a little bit anxious is who is? Eli, because he's waiting for Elijah the prophet. The door opens. Doesn't seem to appear. The Seder is over. This family's had a wonderful time. Eli hides his disappointment, and he trudges all the way home. A few weeks later, he sees the rabbi. The rabbi notices he's not too happy. Eli, come to my study. You don't seem happy. I'm not happy, Rabbi. You made a promise to me. Yes. I fulfilled everything you told me to do, and I didn't see Elijah the prophet. The rabbi says, 1 second. Let me look through the texts. I'm sorry, the texts are quite clear. Are you sure you didn't see Elijah the prophet? Tell me exactly what you did. And Eli goes through step by step by step. The rabbi says, I see you don't understand. Opens up his drawer, pulls out a small little mirror, says, look in the mirror. What do you see? What do I see? Is this some sort of trick? The rabbi says, Eli, you showed up in a small village. You helped a poor family celebrate the Passover Seder, and then you disappeared. And you know what they're saying? This napkin, this serviette, this fork, this kiddush cup, this silver, this all was given to us by who? By Elijah the prophet. You met Elijah the prophet because you were Elijah the prophet. You did an incredible act of goodness and compassion and kindness to this family. Don't you understand? It's far more important to be Elijah than to meet Elijah. And Eli looked at the rabbi and says, you are indeed a very wise rabbi. You have answered my wish. And for the rest of his life, Eli was no longer searching for Elijah the prophet. Instead, he was Elijah the prophet. So a beautiful story called Looking for Elijah by Alex. Thank you.